Welcome back to the worst music festival disasters. Last time we covered some of the more well-known tragedies, and we're going even deeper now. Because behind every chaotic headline and horrific story were real people who never made it home. And often it wasn't their fault at all, but it was the result of corporate greed, poor planning, or band management gone wrong. With that in mind, let's dive back into the iceberg. Altamont Speedway pre-festival. The late 1960s are often remembered as the peak and the grime end of the peace and love era. Counterculture was rising, people were protesting against the Vietnam War, fighting for women's rights and civil rights, and a new way of living. And somehow music was at the center of all of it. On December 6, 1969, just 4 months after Woodstock 69 painted the image of harmony, the Altamont Speedway Free Festival tried to recreate that magic on the West Coast. About 300,000 people showed up, expecting to see Woodstock West. The lineup was stacked with big names like Santana, Jefferson Airplane, but the headliner was definitely the Rolling Stones. Some say they were the anti-Beatles. I mean, if the Beatles were polished and hopeful, the Stones were about sex, drugs and rock and roll. Their songs like Sympathy for the Devil and Gimme Shelter didn't hide from the chaos of the world, but nobody did expect to see that chaos at Altamont. The problem was actually quite simple: the security. Instead of professionals, the organizers handed the job to none other than Hells Angels, a motorcycle group, who was at the time very notorious because of its involvement into very illegal businesses. So the organizers decided to pay them $500 worth of beer, and I'm not making this up, I swear. As you might guess, they didn't exactly play by the rulebook, as this isn't something they were known for. But what happened? Well, instead of protecting the fans, they got drunk, hot and violent. This could be seen while Jefferson Airplane played, explaining the situation. They started to beat people with pool cues and motorcycle chains to keep order. Shocking, what a plot twist, I know. Also, their singer, Marty Ballin, was knocked unconscious by an angel mid-performance.
Is this on? You're talking to me, I'm gonna talk to you.
I'm not talking to you, man. I'm talking to the people that hit my lead singer in the head.
You're talking to my people.
Right.
Now let me tell you what's happening. What's happening?
The band Grateful Dead saw that the things were a bit out of control and refused even to play. And you know what they say, what you shout into the woods is what echoes back. And soon the crowd's anger became the echo, turning restless and hostile.
Hey! Oh!
No!
Hold it!
No!
But the true collapse came during the Stones set, right as they performed the song Under My Thumb. In the crowd was 18-year-old Meredith Hunter, a young black man who was attending the concert with his girlfriend. He was being harassed and shot by the Angels. At one point, Hunter pulled out a revolver, likely to protect himself. Before he could react, several Hells Angels rushed him, and one of them, Alan Passarno, stabbed Hunter to death in front of the stage, all while the Rolling Stones kept playing. His last moments were even captured on film in the documentary Gimme Shelter. You can literally see how Mick Jagger's face changes as he realizes that something horrific just happened. By the end of the night, 4 people were dead, dozens more injured, and the dream of that Altamont would become the next Woodstock disappeared. It was a festival meant to embody freedom, but in the end, it ended in chaos and bloodshed.
Why are we fighting? Why are we fighting? We don't want to fight. Come on.
Las Vegas Music Festival. This one is honestly one of the worst things I covered in a while. I know that the whole list is terrible, but this one really stands out. I can't imagine being in such a situation. It's October 1st, 2017. The Rope 91 Harvest Music Festival in Las Vegas was supposed to be a laid-back country event, with thousands gathering to watch Jason Aldean perform. Around 22,000 people packed in the open-air venue, laughing, drinking and singing along. Nobody expected that this event would become the deadliest mass shooting in modern US history. But people didn't know that high above them, On the 32nd floor on the Mandalay Bay Hotel, 64-year-old Stefan Pedic has smashed out his windows and set up an arsenal ready to go all out. He built himself a sniper nest because the guy managed to smuggle 24 firearms into this small hotel room. At 10:05 p.m. the shooting erupted. At first many thought it was fireworks, that familiar pop sound echoing through the music, and nobody was recognizing those as shots. But then the music stopped, and within seconds the horrifying realization kicked in.
This was fired in 32-135.
Someone was shooting into a crowd. Pedic fired hundreds of rounds into the packed audience. Panic turned into absolute chaos. He was so quickly firing and reloading that the police suspected for a long time there was another shooter involved. Fans ducked, screamed and tried to shield each other. Some played dead, others ran blindly tripping over bodies, not even knowing where the shots were coming from because of the echo. The videos of these events were gut-wrenching. People running aimlessly, crying, not knowing if the next bullet will hit them or not. Seeing the police officers on ground, scared and pinned down by the relentless gunfire as they try to move forward is enough to send chills down my spine.
Can you see where it's come from? No.
For 10 minutes straight, this nightmare continued. He fired more than 1,000 rounds, killing 60 people and wounding at least 413, and the panic and the chaos brought the total number of the injury to approximately 867. What makes this Los Angeles attack even more disturbing is the lack of answers. Pedic was a simple 64-year-old former auditor and a real estate businessman who was living 80 miles northeast of Los Angeles in a retirement community. Pedic left no motive, no note, no manifesto. He wasn't tied to any group and no one knows why he did it. He was just a wealthy gambler who turned this hotel room into a nest and then turned this music festival into a battlefield. After 10 minutes after shooting started, it all came to an end. When the LAPD and the SWAT team breached his room, they would found that Pedic died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So basically he ended his story before officers could capture him. So sadly the police couldn't question him. Later they would search his computer, finances, background and even interviewed his girlfriend, but nothing could explain why he carried out this attack. The only thing that I found out, which was kind of interesting, that he was son of Benjamin Pedic, a bank robber who was on the FBI's most wanted list between 1969 and 1977. As horrific as this event was, the fact that there is no clear motive behind it makes it even more unsettling. The Baked Potato Jazz Club. There is a small but legendary jazz club in Studio City, California called The Baked Potato. It hosted countless iconic players, including the members of Toto, Steely Dan's touring musicians, Frank Zappa's band and many more. It is often described as a musicians club, where the best of the best came to jam, experiment and connect with the audience up close. On May 21st it was hosted by Nick Menza, the former drummer of thrash metal giants Megadeth, who was best known for his work on classics like Rust in Peace and Countdown to Extinction. After leaving Megadeth in the late 90s, Menza stepped away from the arenas and stadiums, focusing instead on smaller gigs, jamming sessions and exploring different styles of music. And the Baked Potato seemed like the place to be. That night he was performing with his band Om, led by the fellow Megadeth guitarist Chris Poland. The vibe was intimate, maybe 40 or 50 people were in the audience. It was far from the massive crowds of Megadeth days, but Menza seemed genuinely happy just playing music. Then, during the third song of the set, something shocking happened. Menza suddenly collapsed mid-performance. At first some thought it was part of an act, a dramatic moment, but when he didn't move, panic spread through the room. His bandmates rushed to his side and the small audience realized that something was horribly wrong. Despite the immediate efforts to revive him, Nick Menza was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 51 years old. The cause was later confirmed as a massive heart attack. What makes this tragedy hit even harder is how sudden it was. One moment he was pounding the drums with energy, the next he was gone. Fans who were there described it as surreal and heartbreaking, watching a legend die right in front of them, doing what he loved the most, playing music. Nick Menza's death wasn't caused by violence, fire or chaos, but it remains one of the most haunting concert tragedies. Pearl Jam at Roskilde Festival. Denmark's Roskilde Festival is one of the European's biggest and oldest music festivals, held annually in Denmark since 1971. It started as a small hippie gathering inspired by Woodstock, but grew into a massive, week-long event that attracts over 100,000 people each year, and it's known for its huge lineups. On that night, on June 30th, 2000, tens of thousands of fans packed the grounds, and the headliner was none other than Pearl Jam, one of the most iconic bands to emerge from the Seattle grunge movement. By 2000, they weren't just another rock band, they had defined an entire decade of rock. For many, this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. What should have been one of the biggest nights of their lives became one of the worst. Ironically, that day had begun with Joy, the daughter of Soundgarden's frontman Chris Cornell, was born, and the band celebrated together, as she was the first daughter among their friend group. But only a few hours later, Pearl Jam stepped on the Roskilde stage, unaware that that night would end in tragedy. As the band performed, the massive crowd began to sway and lean forward, a pretty normal sight at big festivals.
On the count of three steps back, please. 1, 2, 3.
But the ground that day was slick and muddy after days of rain. Fans started to slip, fell and were pulled under.
Three steps back, please. 1, 2, 3.
The movement of the crowd quickly turned to a crush, with bodies piling on top of each other. Eddie Vedder pleaded to the audience to step back and give them some space, but the pressure was only more intense. Eddie was a person who was always proud how they took care of each other while having concerts. While he was talking to his fans, the security and nearby fans tried desperately to pull people out, but the chaos was simply overwhelming. Eventually, the band completely stopped from playing.
Up front here, and they're gonna ask us to stop for 5 minutes. Alright, so there's nothing gonna happen musically for 5 minutes, and while we're stopped, I'm gonna pretend like I'm your best friend, and do me a favor, okay? Because you have some other best friends up front here that are hurting, okay?
When they saw people waving for help and bodies being lifted out of the pit, by the end, 9 lives, all young men between 17 and 26, had died from suffocation and trampling, and 26 others were injured. Vader was visibly broken on the stage, unable to process what had just happened. The tragedy left Pearl Jam devastated. They cancelled shows, went into hiding for months, and even questioned whether they could even perform live again. When they finally did return, years later they wrote a song, Love Boat Captain, with including the lyrics, "Lost 9 friends will never know, 2 years ago today." The Roskilde disaster didn't just scar Pearl Jam, it changed live music forever. Festivals across Europe adopted stricter safety protocols and crowd monitoring to prevent similar tragedies. Beverly Hills Supper Club.
In Greater Cincinnati, there may be no time etched more deeply into the hearts of those affected than the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire.
Building without permits is never a good idea. When you want to add a balcony to your house, you have to go through piles of paperwork, which feels insane. But then you look at places like the Beverly Hills Supper Club, who had expanded their building several times over the years without proper permits, basically creating a death trap, a maze of narrow hallways, poor ventilations, no sprinkles and no alarms. However you want to put it, this building was definitely not designed or even built for so many people to be crammed inside on that horrible night. You could smell the disaster a mile away. This brings us to May 28, 1977, when the Beverly Hills Supper Club in Southgate, Kentucky, was packed with over 3,000 people. Even though the fire marshal later revealed the venue could never hold more than 600 people. But that night, the headliner, John Davison, was set to perform in the Cabaret Room, the venue's largest space. John Davison was a popular American singer, actor and a television host in the 1960s and 70s, often appearing in different shows and Broadways. But he was also known for the Beverly Hills club fire. At around 9 p.m., staff noticed a smoke in a smaller room and tried to fight the fire themselves instead of immediately calling the fire department. That hesitation proved deadly. The flames spread fast through the walls and ceiling, and by the time the guests felt that something was horribly wrong,
We hit it together, everything was going great. It was beautiful. If the people had just moved when they were told to get out.
Because when we got out there, we just figured everybody was out. And when they started...
Yeah, we just figured everyone was out.
but it was already too late. Panic erupted, and the biggest problem was that there were no clear evacuation roads. Doors were described by people like almost hidden. Exits were blocked and the hallways turned into death traps. Because people quickly rushed into them, they didn't have any space to move. Within minutes, the whole building was filled with thick, toxic smoke. Even when the firefighters arrived, the place was already engulfed in flames. By the end, the fire swallowed 165 people and more than 200 were injured. One of the most devastating accounts came from a young firefighter who broke down crying while counting victims. What shattered him wasn't just the scale of death, but seeing a half-dead body of a pregnant woman who broke him completely. The investigation that followed revealed an unforgivable list of failures. The club was overcrowded far beyond capacity. No sprinklers, no alarms, and no proper fire exits. And instead of ordering an immediate evacuation, they tried to fight the fire themselves, wasting precious time and making the disaster even deadlier. The saddest thing here is that no one was criminally convicted, but the outrage was so huge that it forced reforms in US fire codes.
Well, I remember one of the firemen turned to me and he said they're piled up like cordwood in there.
Tomorrowland 2015. How many of you have heard of Tomorrowland? I mean, it's one of the world's biggest electric dance music festivals, held every year in Boom, Belgium. Since 2005, known for its fantasy-themed stage, over-the-top productions and the lineup of the world's top DJs. It's basically Disneyland for ravers. And of course, they wanted to bring that magic to America. Enter TomorrowWorld, held in Chattahoochee Hills, Georgia, on 8,000 acres of farmland. The first years went fine, but in 2015, things left a bitter taste in the mouths of every concert goer. Not because of any violence or tragedies that happened, but it sparked enough chaos that the show was completely cancelled. The problem this time was that nature was simply against them. What started with clouds building up turned quickly into heavy rain. This, on the other hand, turned this beautiful field into a swampland. Walkways, campsites, and roads sank in mud, making it completely impossible for the fans to move around. Think of a techno version of Wacken. By Saturday night, the transportation system collapsed. Shuttles couldn't reach the parking areas, leaving thousands of fans stranded miles away from the cars and hotels. Fans had to walk for hours in the dark and cold, many barefoot, without food and water or even a phone service. Some literally decided to sleep in the mud by the roadside. And at the end came Sunday, when the organizers made it even worse. With the decision, they locked out everyone who wasn't camping on site, meaning thousands of tickets holders were turned away at the gates despite paying hundreds of dollars. Chaos exploded on social media with photos of exhausted ravers covered in mud, stories of fights breaking out, and there were some reports of SA. Like always, security was stretched very thin, poorly housed and largely ineffective, because of course organizers had to cut corners everywhere. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Tomorrowland apologized and did partial refunds. 2015 was the last edition of this festival ever held in the US. What was meant to bring the Tomorrow magic to America turned into Mudland. It's a story of bad weather, bad planning and broken logistics. Corinaldo Stampede. It's supposed to be a fun night out in Corinaldo, a small town in Italy. Hundreds of teenagers had packed into the Lanterna Azzurra nightclub to see Sfera e Basta, one of Italy's biggest rap stars. It was the night of December 8, 2018, when something quite interesting happened. In the middle of the crowd, while Sfera was performing, someone released a pepper spray-like substance into the air, in a club that was already jammed way beyond safe capacity. The effects were immediate. People started coughing, choking, their eyes burned, and everyone just wanted to get out. Now the problem was the exits. The main escape road was narrow, poorly secured metal walkway leading outside. As the crowd surged forward, the railings gave in. People fell, others piled on top of them, and in seconds the panic turned into a deadly stampede. By the end, 6 people were killed, 5 teenagers and another mother who wanted to pick up her daughter, and more than 100 people were injured. Investigators later revealed shocking negligence. The club's legal capacity was 469 people, but that night around 1400 were inside. How the hell can this even happen? Security was almost non-existing and hundreds of people may have entered without tickets, and the pepper spray incident was apparently linked to a robbery attempt. In 2023, several organizers and officials were convicted for negligence and safety violations, finally holding someone accountable for a tragedy that should have never happened. The Who concert disaster. The Who are a legendary British rock band formed in the 1960s, famous for the explosive live shows and iconic anthems like My Generation, Baba O'Reilly and I Won't Get Fooled Again. Alongside the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, they defined the British invasion and became one of the most influential rock acts in the history. By 1979, they were deep into their United States tour, and for fans in Cincinnati, their concert on December 3rd at the Riverfront Coliseum was the event of the year. Around 80,000 people showed up that night. The entire event was set up with festival seating. First come, first served for the best spots on the floor. Simple as that. But that meant that fans lined up for hours in the freezing cold, desperate to get as close as possible to the stage. And then came the spark that ignited the explosion. The band decided to do a last-minute sound check, and when the crowd outside heard it, they thought the concert had started. Thousands surged towards the door at once, but the venue had only a handful of doors open and the security was completely unprepared. Fans were pressed against the glass, walls and fences, crushed together so tightly they couldn't even breathe. This wasn't a usual quick stampede, it was slow, suffocating squeeze that dragged on for nearly half an hour. Some victims died standing upright, trapped in the crowd and unable to fall. The fact that you were squeezed by unstoppable force and saw people taking their last breaths near you sounds fucking terrible.
I don't know if you've seen any pictures of the clothing stacks that were at the side of each door that had been opened. When these people came through that door, it was like they're being put through a hamburger masher, you know, literally, and their clothes are being peeled off of them as they're coming through the door.
By the time it was over, 11 people were dead and dozens more were injured, and many stated they never realized they had even blood on their shoes. To make it even worse, the band didn't know what the hell was happening. They went on stage and played the entire show unaware that just outside, fans had been killed trying to get in. The people in the front basically didn't know that the people in the back were injured and evacuated, and that the rest was transported in body bags. When Pt.2 later learned the truth, he called it one of the darkest days in the band's career. In the end, the tour wasn't cancelled, because they feared they couldn't get that momentum in the US again, but every single remaining show was dedicated to the victims. Still, this tragedy left a scar. Instead of blaming poor planning and crowd control, much of the media turned to the fans, painting them as reckless, drugged-out animals. But the reality was much more simpler. 11 people had lost their lives that night, and no amount of finger pointing could change that.
I can't remember when.
AC/DC at Salt Palace. This is a bit of an odd one, and I will explain later why. It was January 18, 1991, at the Salt Palace in Salt Lake City, Utah. AC/DC was one of the loudest and most electrifying rock bands in the world at the time. While on the Razor's Edge tour, they were at the top of the world. With hits like Highway to Hell, Back in Black and Thunderstruck, they had a reputation for wild shows and almost unmatched ability to make the crowd go crazy. That night about 13,000 fans were packed in the arena. Energy was high, the crowd was restless, and soon as the music hit, fans started to push forward. At first it was the usual chaos for a rock concert, shoving, mosh pits and bodies being pressed tight, but it quickly became something else. Something worse. Security at the place wasn't ready for this intensity. People at the front were pinned against the barricades, crushed by the sheer force of the crowds behind them. Witnesses later said you could see fans screaming for help, but they couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and the security couldn't help. People started to collapse. Others tried to push their way out, but they were dragged back into the crush. The biggest problem was that the band didn't stop to play.
Compounding the tragedy for AC/DC, however, were claims by fans and Salt Palace security that the band was asked to stop playing once the stampede began, but did not stop until some 45 minutes into the show.
By the time the chaos was over, 3 teenage girls, all between 14 and 19, had been killed in the stampede, with several more injured. And I don't know why, but I felt like this one was kinda swept under the rug. I mean, the information is there, but not as much as you would think. Considering of how big a band they are, there were incidents with fewer body counts and smaller bands that were more documented than this one, and I found this just a bit odd. The band themselves were devastated by the news. Later, Brian Jones stated they never wanted to hurt anyone at their concerts, but the tragedy sparked heavy criticism of both the band and the venue. Salt Lake City mayor called for tighter security regulations at their concerts, and the Salt Palace itself was demolished years later, thought for unrelated reasons. And I also want to add a quote from one of the girl's father. "No parent should ever have to face such a senseless death, especially not from a rock and roll show."
After expressing its, quote, heartfelt sympathy to the families of the 3 victims, AC/DC said that once the gravity of the situation was conveyed to the band, it immediately halted its performance for 15 minutes in cooperation with the local fire marshals on the scene.
Gigi Allin after concert.
There are a couple of things you should know about the program you're about to watch. Our first guest, Gigi Allen, has been called the most violent man in rock and roll.
Ending this layer with one of the most famous punks of all time, Gigi Allin. Gigi Allin wasn't just notorious, he was self-destruction incarnate. The chaos he delivered on stage went beyond anything a normal mind could comprehend, and you will never see anything like this in the mainstream. On stage, he smashed himself with bottles, cut his body open, rolled into his own feces, attacked the audience members, and starts riot mid-show. He even promised that one day he commits suicide on stage as the ultimate punk statement. And sort of, he did. So what do you expect from such a man when it comes to performance on stage? Most of his shows barely lasted minutes before the police shut them down. But in these minutes, it was a total spectacle of filth and blood combined with madness. He was quite popular but mostly underground, and people always anticipated his next show to see what would happen next. Then came June 27, 1993. Gigi played at a gas station, a small East Side Village club in New York City. True to form, the show spiraled into chaos, Gigi was naked and smeared in filth, doing his thing. The whole 9 yards, you could say. After the gig, he stormed out with a mob of fans following him through the streets of Manhattan. He looked like a prophet, leading a parade of punks, almost like Jesus himself. And the joke is, that was actually his legal name, Jesus Christ Allin. Eventually they decided to go to an after party. And as you can guess, there were no stopping to his madness. But at the party he wanted to calm down and relax. That's when he accidentally gave himself a little dose of H. By the next morning he was dead at just 36-year-old. His body was found in the friend's apartment, again still smeared in dirt and blood from the show the night before. The people around him thought it was just another act, because with Gigi nobody could ever tell where the performance ended and reality began. In the end he didn't die on stage like he always promised, but the way he went out was filthy, chaotic, surrounded by punks after a violent show. It still felt disturbingly fitting. His funeral was no less bizarre. Allin's bloated corpse was dressed in a black leather jacket and a trademark jockstrap. And Allin's funeral became a celebration of his life. Friends placed at AC/DC, threw drinks and booze in his coffin and treated like a goodbye party. But I think that's something Allin wanted. I think it's safe to say that his death didn't shock no one. It's still terrible, but the time was a ticking time bomb. But it sealed his place as punk's darkest legend, a man who lived and died in total self-destruction. But believe it or not, there was someone even darker. On the other side of the world in Croatia, lived a man that many called the Balkan Gigi Allen. His name was Satan Panonski. He wasn't just shocking on stage, he was a convicted murderer, a patient in a mental institution, and later even a soldier in a brutal war. But also a punker at heart. Where Gigi's distractions were chaos for chaos' sake, Satan Panonski's story was tied to real blood, real violence, and raw emotions. His performances blurred the line between art, insanity, and genuine horror. If you want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, I would recommend you check out the video on the screen. If not, there are over 20 Iceberg charts waiting for you on my channel. Thank you for watching and all the nice comments I got on my previous video. You are all truly wonderful and gave me a lot of positive energy in time of need. And I'm so happy that I have you guys. You are truly wonderful. Thank you for watching once again.